Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third panel of WSIS for the Global Coalition on Aging partnership with WSIS in 2022. This, the second year of the Decade of Healthy Aging. I will be introducing our moderator, Amal Rafah, in a moment, but first I'd like to ask you to show the video, the WSIS ITU background video. Thank you. Well, I hope you all love that video. We've become very much appreciative of it. Welcome again. This is our third panel of our Global Coalition on Aging WSIS Older Persons track. And there are 3 World Health Organization panels as well this week. Today's is on tech solutions for age-related diseases. I'm delighted to thank and introduce Amal Abu Rafah, a friend, a colleague, and a leader at the United Nations, among many other things, of the Decade of Healthy Aging. So Amal, let me turn everything over to you, and thank you and all the panelists for today's set of ideas that you will bring forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Good morning to everyone from New York, and good afternoon and good evening for those joining us from other parts of the world. It's always a treat and a pleasure to partner with the Global Coalition on Aging. So in today's session, we will explore how innovations in technology have had and continue to have a positive impact on the lives of older persons, and how their expansion has the potential to improve our health systems and make them more resilient. So overall, our aim for this session is to uncover how innovation in technology solutions can tackle diseases and conditions that increase in prevalence with older age, including vision impairment, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, fractures, cancer, dementia, and other neurological disorders and communicable diseases that place older adults at higher risk for such conditions as influenza, shingles, pneumococcal pneumonia, and the COVID-19 virus. And obviously, throughout the ICTs and Older Persons track this week, we will explore how technology solutions can help achieve the goals of the United Nations Decade of Healthy Aging. During our session today, we will talk about how vaccines, new medicines, diagnostics, in-home care, and more detailed and sophisticated clinical trials that bring drugs to those who need them faster and more efficiently are all being helped by tandem developments in technology. We have a great lineup of panelists and experts with us, and I'll be introducing them one by one as we give them an opportunity to make their presentations before we move later into the Q&A segment, which I encourage you all with questions to put them in the Q&A icon that you have in front of you for the experts to answer. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michelle Johnson, who's the Associate Professor of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at the University of Pennsylvania. Michelle's research is focused on robot-mediated rehabilitation due to older age, neural disease, and injury. Michelle directs a rehabilitation robotics lab at UPenn. Its mission is to translate research findings on these techniques into the development of assistive and therapeutic rehabilitation robots capable of improving the quality of life and function on activities of daily living, both in supervised and unsupervised settings. Really super cool stuff. So Michelle, your research is mainly in the area of robot-mediated rehabilitation with a focus on the investigation and rehabilitation of dysfunctions due to aging, and as we said, neural disease or neural injury. Can you give us a couple of examples on how robots have been used so far in rehabilitation of older adults? And it would be also great to hear from you on what you predict the future of robotics will look like. The floor is yours.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you are aware of what we're doing. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Again, thank you, Amal, for inviting me to this panel. I wanted to focus my comments today on present and future needs for robot technologies for elders aging across the continuum. And I'm going to give you some examples from my work. As Amal said, the amount of people living with disabilities are growing, and essentially what we're confronting is a shortage in trained clinicians, and there's a gap in healthcare. In my work, we definitely see that this gap can be thought of as how do we help clinicians overcome and still support the healthcare of persons. Robotic technologies have shown promise of being key tools that can support older adults, including those that are active, frail elders dealing with disabling conditions. I spent 20 years examining how robotic technologies can bridge healthcare gaps for older persons, especially those dealing with motor and cognitive impairment due to a stroke. For active elders, I want to show my slide here. We see, for example, this Baxter robot. Our colleagues have been looking at how do we use robots to encourage frail and active elders to continue to exercise in a preventive mode. We've also thought about and other colleagues, how social robots like Nebu has been supporting chronic disease management. This is another colleague's work here. QT, social robot looking at supporting companionship. Here is a social robot from Japan looking at supporting anxiety alleviation from those with dementia. And in my lab, we've been focusing on social robots like this, rehab robots like this Adler that is designed to support recovery of the upper extremity after, for example, a stroke. One of the key things that we also want to talk about is that while the evidence is promising, there's still things that need to be improved. And I want to suggest improvement on 3 levels: autonomy, affordability, and adaptability. When we talk about autonomy, I want to kind of give you present to, so for example, this robot Pepper and the programming of this robot to support people within the hospital environment. And the question is, where should this robot be? Older persons desire independence and inclusion. Should robots be fully autonomous to assist elders to maintain autonomy? I had a student do a recent survey, and we found that most therapists would prefer to have shared autonomy with the robots, and they want it to direct, they want to to be able to direct some tasks alone, but control for others. Another survey we conducted told us that older people like robots being, but they desire humans to have control over some of the high risk tasks such as medication prescription and diagnosis. So success in dealing with shared autonomy problem is important from robot technology, for the robot technology to reach its full potential. One of the key things that we've been doing in our lab has been developing robots that can have this shared autonomy. So you see the potential for the therapist to still be in the picture while the social robot is being guided. My recent PhD student ran several different types of telepresence type activities looking at the relationship or the benefits of this robot. And one of the things that we discovered was that shared autonomy can come with some challenges in terms of cognition and the cognitive load that it can demand on the therapist, and that we see that task difficulty, while that might increase because the therapists have to do more, we need to then, if we do full autonomy, then how do we deal with safety issues? When we talk about affordability, which is the other thing, we want to realize that most robots are not available outside the hospital and clinical environments. But when I look at this slide here, and I put this slide together, it's a slide that showed, a slide that shows that robots are primarily in high income areas, and that most robot systems are, most of the studies on robots are done in high income areas. 95% of the clinical trials are done in high income areas. However, the disease burden are in low and middle income countries. Most stroke survivors and most people suffering with disabilities are in low and middle income countries. One review study stated that while robots are not affordable despite their high cost, a likely advantage is that they automate interventions for robotic therapies and require minimal input from rehabilitation professionals in terms of their time and effort. So that suggests that we really need to think about how robots can stretch resources and increase efficiency of clinicians in diverse rehab settings, including in low and middle income countries. And a future focus must be about considering novel ways to reduce costs, increase scalability while maintaining efficiency of these systems. Our lab has been doing some of that work in Mexico and in Botswana. We've been looking at low cost, 1 degree of freedom robot systems, looking at enabling it to do cognitive and motor assessment. We've actually set up a couple of labs in Botswana, thinking through how do we use these more affordable systems within low and middle income countries. The last thing I want to talk about a little bit is about adaptability and inclusivity, and the fact that when we think about older adults, they live in diverse settings, they desire care and rehab to take place anywhere they live. And so as roboticists, we're dreaming about developing one robot that will do it all, but this robot currently does not exist. And today, more features often mean more money. So I want to leave us with this, that future robot systems must consider cost, autonomy, benefits, and the diversity of the aging population to deliver affordable and cost-effective robots that are usable worldwide. I'll stop my comments there.
Thank you, Michelle. As I said in the beginning, super cool stuff. You brilliantly connected the issues, the opportunities and challenges related to robots and what possible policy implications there could be, particularly what member states can do in that regard, which is, the angle that we come from the UN. I love that you brought up that older people are a diverse group of people and therefore their needs and preferences would differ. Love the middle ground on shared autonomy. It's not black and white. There are many shades of gray there. And specifically appreciate your reference to affordable settings in low and middle income countries. Older people in those countries are often left behind from these conversations on robotics. So really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Jennifer Lavelle, who leads the Global Business Marketing Ambulatory Monitoring and Diagnostics at Philips. Jen will enrich the discussion with her over 15 years experience across medical device, lab diagnostics, and information technology. Jen's also an expert at transforming brands and building customer-centric sales and marketing programs that communicate value. Her knowledge is demonstrated in sales strategy, business development, sales training, and voice of the customer. Welcome, Jen, and thank you so much for joining us today. I was told that Philips has made the change from a lighting company to a health company. This transition is quite mind-boggling to me. Can you tell us how Philips is paving the way for better care for older people? And also, what in your view is the role of diagnostic technology in preventing diseases to develop as we all age? The floor is yours, Jen.
Thanks, Amal. Absolutely quite a shift from its roots when we look at Philips' legacy. And today, Philips' overall mission is to improve health and well-being through meaningful innovation. And we believe that healthcare should be safe, seamless, efficient, effective, and deliver integrated care pathways. And to enable integrated end-to-end care pathways and remote care, Philips has made recent acquisitions in companies like biotelemetry, which allow providers to extend services and solutions across the entire patient care continuum from hospital to home and home to hospital. So this allows patients, typically elderly with multiple comorbidities, to be managed outside of the hospital from the comfort of their own home. So this frees critical resources in the hospital, but also provides a better patient experience and ensures the delivery of care at a low cost with high outcomes. And care teams are going to receive actionable alerts to enable timely interventions and proactive care to avoid unnecessary ER visits, readmissions, to ensure that a patient is brought into the appropriate care setting as needed to best manage the health of the patient. And if we look at an example of this from a cardiovascular perspective and heart disease, which we all know is the leading cause of death in the world, what we can now do is proactively identify patients at home who may need medication to manage their heart rhythm, or may require an intervention like a stent or pacemaker to be implanted before a catastrophic event occurs. And we can take this post-procedural, so post-ablation, post-TAVR, we can now enable those faster transitions of care to the home for our patients by putting a monitor on the patient to extend the clinical surveillance for the patient at home. And that clinical team has access to the right information at the right time to intervene as necessary. So again, we're seeing this overall shift of care into the home. And by integrating that end-to-end care pathway, this enables our health systems to shift from episodic to continuous care, care in the hospital to care anywhere, moving from reactive to proactive care, and becoming more from a condition specific to a whole person care approach, which is really critical as we manage our elderly population who are facing multiple chronic diseases, comorbidities. And at Philips, as we continue to evolve our AI capabilities and we move into this world of more predictive screening, what we're looking to do in the example of cardiovascular, again, is looking at how do we implement systematic screening for our high-risk patients, for example, who could be 75 years and older, to screen them proactively to identify things like AFib, who's at risk for AFib, how do we intervene earlier? So we're shifting from that diagnosis and treatment to prevention and risk stratification. So this is where we're heading in the future, Amal.
Thank you so much, Jen. This is so interesting to hear, and this shift, this transition that you're highlighting from care in a hospital setting to care at home may very much in the future not be something that's a luxury. It may be a necessity. I mean, we're seeing the experience from the pandemic and so many growing emergency situations, climate change that might, require this shift to go back. And I'm very happy that you're talking about this comprehensive integrated care for older persons that's a necessity, and moving from a reactive into more of a proactive approach to diagnostics and dealing with the healthcare of older persons. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mike Denvoy, who is the Chief Medical Officer and the Executive Vice President of Medical Affairs and Pharmacovigilance at Bayer. Mike has extensive experience across clinical development and international medical affairs. His career in pharmaceutical industry began when he joined Glaxo Group Research in clinical pharmacology. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike. It's a pleasure to have you here. I was wondering, what are some of the most interesting digitally enabled innovations that you're seeing that target age-related diseases? And I would really appreciate your insight on how we can make sure that these innovations reach the people that need them the most, and it reaches them on time. The floor is yours, Mike.
Great, thanks, Amal, and really my pleasure to be here and on this panel and with the great fellow panelists we have on this topic, which is close to my heart. And I think what I'm going to say very much also pivots very well from what Jennifer was just speaking about. And Bayer is a company that has a mission of health for all and hunger for none. And to achieve that, we really have to leverage all the technologies and science we have at our disposal, as well as making sure those actually get to the people who need them. And so I'd say I see three real areas where we can take and use technology: disease detection and prevention, the management of chronic disease, and how we can leverage the digital advances in terms of accelerating and driving forward our science and new therapeutics better. And in disease detection and prevention, we're really beginning to understand how we can help patients monitor themselves and to have early detection of potential deviations in their healthcare. Jennifer spoke, for example, it's now pretty simple to monitor potentially if your heart rhythm has gone into the wrong direction with atrial fibrillation, for example. The sooner you intervene there, the better, to prevent potentially a devastating stroke, which can then be life-changing or even life-ending. And being able to put that in the hands of people in their normal daily lives, so not reducing the amount of medical intervention, but also allowing that to happen naturally. And the burden of chronic disease is enormous. In the US, I think about 60% of adults are believed to live with at least one chronic condition. In Europe, a bit lower, but still in the order of 40, 50%. And then often it becomes multi-morbid. And managing those diseases in the traditional way is neither in the interests of the patient or compatible with an effective healthcare system. We really have to use technology to help people have an integrated approach to managing these chronic diseases, be that heart failure, chronic kidney disease, diabetes. And there again, also allowing people not to have to be visiting their physician or healthcare professional regularly, but only maybe when there's an acute need. And most of these chronic diseases, the severe declines happen during so-called acute episodes, to say that of heart failure or COPD. So if we can help, say, give someone a way of just assessing their chronic lung disease and maybe knowing sooner that they may be heading to an exacerbation, then intervene, avoiding hospitalization, which we know from research is really where the severe declines and deteriorations happen. And with heart failure, we've seen actually some very interesting data now published, which I put with the chat later, where you can really show a significant impact in terms of death and hospitalization by well-designed digital monitoring tools, which are in the hands of the patients, but also with their physicians. And then thirdly, in terms of how can we find better innovations for some of these diseases in oncology and cancer and in heart disease. And we're working very hard to start to use digital to look through big databases and genomic databases to start to better understand some of these diseases where we still have a pretty rudimentary understanding, such as heart failure. And the other barrier we have is when we find a new innovation, the cost and time to bring it into the hands of patients is just becoming prohibitive, particularly in areas such as cardiovascular. So we're starting to see how can we use real world evidence and approaches to better designing our studies and executing them so we can reduce the cost, improve the speed, and therefore bring those innovations more quickly and more broadly to society. And then just wrapping up, to make this all work, I believe needs collaborations. So that's why I really enjoy and love these interactions partnered with WHO and GCOA, because we really see here the range and diversity of academic approaches, technology company approaches such as Philips, healthcare companies such as Bayer, who can really need to work together, because this is not something that's going to be solved by one enterprise or one academic group. And most importantly is bring the end user, bring the patient into this. I think we've seen very encouraging data in the pandemic that older people are very facile and can use technology, but they have to be given access to it and the understanding of that and the support, and make sure they're a part of your co-creation. And then finally, as all the partners here, we need to work with regulators so that we can find efficient and effective paths to bring these different and in approaches to innovation in healthcare into the hands of the healthcare system and patients and their families as soon as possible. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Mike. I mean, this is super interesting. Using technology to put more power in older people's hands, empower them to play a more active role in monitoring themselves to avoid, as you said, devastating outcomes is so key. And it's so interesting for us to hear that these traditional methods, are not going to be sustainable for the future, and we have to think in a way that's more forward-looking. I think real-world evidence is needed, and we always talk about an equitable world and access to these technologies, but we could certainly start with lessons learned and success examples to help trigger this conversation at an international level, and including older people as co-creators of these technologies will be key. It's so easy for us to assume what's good for them, what they need, but it may not be necessarily what their preference is. And I think building on the comment that you made about the need for collaboration, the Secretary General of the United Nations published recently a report on our common agenda, and in it he called for many things, some of which are two summits. One is called the Summit of the Future, and the other is the World Social Summit, I think both taking place around the year 2025, and I suspect that these topics will be key in those events. So next, I have the pleasure of introducing Diane Thompson, who's the Senior Director of Vaccines, Public Affairs, Global Policy, and Public Affairs at Pfizer. Welcome, Diane. Thank you so much for joining us. Diane is very experienced public affairs professional whose current responsibilities include the adult vaccines portfolio, including respiratory diseases such as COVID-19, as well as other vaccines across the life course. Diane co-chairs the task force for life course immunization at the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations. She also represents public affairs on the International Developed Markets Vaccines Leadership Team. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Diane, how have digital strategies been deployed to promote life course immunization as a key pillar of prevention strategies? And from your experience in this area, why is this considered so important in today's aging societies? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Amal. And it's a real pleasure and privilege to be with you all today. And I think this is a huge topic. And I think there's a few things that I would like to focus on. I I think firstly, we need to look at immunisation infrastructure, and it's predominantly focused on infancy. And we really need to kind of expand that focus to across the life course and to older populations. And I think, you can see that with the impact of the pandemic, it's never been more needed than it is now. And I think, if we can take a different approach to prevention and see it as an investment in healthcare systems, where you can really look at how that can help mitigate the annual burden on disease, the impact on mortality, morbidity, healthcare costs, and downstream social care costs, and the impact on function and frailty. That's the result of often from a decline in underlying function as a result of an infectious disease. And I think if we can kind of look at it through that lens and look at prevention as being something that we need to really look at much more broadly, it's still important to look at it as a seasonal infection, particularly during the winter season, and the impact that health resources, that has on healthcare resources, and how we can think about how they can be redirected. And that can really help continue the ongoing management of and support of individuals and communities that are impacted. And I think, we can also see, that there is a benchmark on prevention that's around, I think it's about 3% of total healthcare expenditures on prevention. And within that, about 9% is on immunisation, and a massive portion of that's on infant immunisation programmes. So it's about rebalancing the budgets to kind of move towards prevention. And we need to think about that through the lens of digital health services as well, both from a person and a population level, because we really need to think about improving, disease surveillance and record keeping as we recover from this pandemic and move into a new phase, as well as thinking about, pandemic preparedness for the future. And I think investments needed, and investment in prevention per se, which includes these things, to leverage these changes for immunisation services moving forward so that the gains for public health improvement can be realised. The other thing that's really interesting is really looking at the question of parity of access to vaccinations at each stage of the life course. And potentially maybe looking at uptake targets. There's different levels there. Should they be at parity at all stages of life? And I think we could also see a move towards digital record keeping. We've seen that happen in the pandemic, because historically that's been very challenging, for adult immunisation. It's been hindered by paper-based records, and digital records are often much more efficient, they're more effective, and it gives people autonomy, as well as enabling health authorities to plan and monitor services and sending electronic reminders. So I think, our kind of, messages that we need to invest in the systems that meet the needs, at all stages of life. We need to really look at surveillance and monitoring systems, consider expanding digital infrastructure for surveillance and record keeping, and really leveraging those digital health services to help identify emerging threats, activate immunisation services to protect against priority pathogens. And that all supports efforts for future pandemic preparedness. So, I think, no one can say it better than Dr. Tedros did when he said back in May 2020, prevention isn't only better than cure, it's cheaper and it's the smartest thing to do. And I think if we look at prioritisation of funding to support innovation and access to vaccine to deliver the goals set out in Immunisation Agenda 2030, that's something that we need to think about, and I know that the global pandemic remains a priority for governments, but we need to help ensure there's protection against all vaccine preventable diseases to maximise the healthcare system capacity and help and try and avert some longer term consequences. So that's it from me, Emma.
Thank you so much, Diane. Wow, that was a lot of information to take in, and I'll be sure to rewatch the recording to take better notes from the messages that you gave us.
Sorry.
This is wonderful. I mean, this life course approach, it's so interesting to hear you as Pfizer also mentioned that, we see that as well in our work at the UN with governments. There's a big push and movement when we talk about children, the youth, even people within the working ages, but then that sort of diminishes as the same individual is growing into older age. So this life course approach, we also found, working with governments, that they respond quite well to that approach. We always talked about rethinking our approach from therapeutic treatment to prevention. And you're talking about also rethinking the approach to prevention itself and how ultimately that gives us gains for public health and saving resources. And this pandemic, like many other things, we saw that it kind of fast forwarded our lives into a future that we knew was coming. And this digital record taking is certainly a good example of that. Thank you so much, Diane. And last, but certainly not least, I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Jian Yang, the Associate Vice President and Senior Director on Digital Health at Eli Lilly and Co. A physician by training with extensive experience in research and development, Jian has keen understanding of the issues, challenges, and opportunities in healthcare systems and the pharmaceutical industry. He's passionate about leveraging digital technology to drive healthcare transformation and deliver better outcomes for older persons. Currently, Jian leads multi-stakeholder teams that are to develop Lilly's capabilities in digital health across therapeutic areas. But before joining Lilly, it is worth flagging to you all that Jian led the efforts in designing and managing HIPAA compliant and medical informatics systems for medical and epidemiological research in collaboration with WHO and the CDC. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jian. Digital health is being embedded across many therapeutic areas, as we've heard, including non-communicable diseases like cancer, visual impairment, and others cited already in today's discussion. Can you tell us about how you are viewing the role of digital health capabilities in this context? And I'm also curious to know in what areas do you see the greatest potential moving forward? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Amal. As many panelists have mentioned, the digital innovation, digital revolution is fastly approaching us. Many technologies are no longer science fiction. They are here, and we just need to figure out a way better use them. And in today's context, as you mentioned, my team is actually working on across a few areas on how we can bring digital to better diagnose diseases, better manage those chronic conditions, as well as, in the future, have a digital drug companion product that we could deliver much better health outcomes to our patients. And since today's topics focus on age-related diseases, I think one disease really hold dearly to my heart is Alzheimer's and its associated dementia. Why is dearly is because, I think many of us probably share this feeling and also stories, our loved ones in our family who may have had that. And to see someone that, you've been with for tens of years, and to see someone personally who brought me up that, had this disease and at the late stage of disease couldn't even recognize you, couldn't even remember your name and mistaking you for someone else. And I think Alzheimer's disease it itself is not only a disease for the individual patients, it's a disease for the whole family and a disease for all the loved ones, as well as for the society. It is going to have a significant economic, social impact on the whole world. From the Lilly perspective, the company has been so determined to really look at a therapy, a drug-modifying therapy in this area. We have suffered many defeats, as well as similar to many other industry colleagues, and of course, we are continue to work on this, and we have medicines in our pipeline which shows great promise in this field. However, we know that this disease, one of the key issues is that we need to diagnose this as early as possible. And today there are, misdiagnoses that, patients may, in future when drugs on the market, will miss that early intervention opportunity. Why I see, the technologies are already here is because science, the already proven science, to show that certain symptoms will show up way before the current prevailing diagnosis technologies such as cognition tests, etc. The digital technology has great potential to really see, detect someone may have, predict someone may go on that track way before that a cognition test, shows there's a cognition impairment. From Lilly's side, we 3 or 4 years ago, we have been working with Apple, with Gates Foundation, with Evidence Health, on a trial that showed the feasibility for MCI patients, which is moderate cognitive impaired patients, to use the digital technology. So it's not an issue of usage of the technology, it's doable. And we have seen in this space that things like speech and even eye movement, will be those promising signals when someone, before other symptoms show up, those early signs will show up. So what I'm saying here is that this is really important, critical for the whole medicine community to understand. And we are very passionate and we kind of determined to drive digital innovation in this space. Many other disease areas, as you mentioned, will also benefit from digital technology. I think when just now when Dr. DeVoy mentioned coronary heart failure, I was smiling because it is the government agency actually challenging us to find a better way of, diagnose, detect, and measure those patients, disease progression as well as, drugs efficacy. We got to find something better than the 6 minutes walk. When you ask a patient just to walk for 6 minutes and try to use that, and it works, but we got to find something much better than that. In this whole field, there's another thing I do want to mention today. It's really a fascinating field called digital therapeutics. And those are the things that we see emerging. And as a company, we are very interested in. What is digital therapeutics? Really, we believe to manage chronic conditions. Now we may potentially have opportunity that before we went directly to the drug treatment, the technology could play a role here. And things like, depression, emotion, disturbance, etc. We're seeing companies playing this field. And we believe, that will be a very promising land for the future innovation technologies. The 3 things I think, I leveraged this opportunity to kind of call out the challenges we have in today's, digital technologies and in the healthcare arena. One is the diversity and inclusion. Many of the technologies today are based on machine learning, artificial intelligence. However, we do know, we do have a diversity issue with the data set used to train those algorithms. And I think that is a unique challenge. I believe the United Nations, WHO could play a role here. We need to make sure those algorithms are trained with diverse data set. And we know that now there's the infamous example, a hotel door, the camera doesn't recognize dark faces. So who would open the door for dark-colored people? I think we really need to avoid that. For that, hotel door wouldn't open, probably you just manually opened it. However, in the healthcare side, if the algorithm malfunctions and misdiagnosed or suggests the wrong treatment, then we're facing life and death issue here. The second one is really medical education. I will call out for governments and academics to work together, make sure our physicians, doctors, under training in med school got to understand the promise and the potential of technology early on. I'm a physician, and I know when we're in med school, there were never about this kind of technology be mentioned. Of course, that was a bit early, as my white hair has shown. But today, I think it will be a great miss now for this batch of med students to really get to understand what's the promise, what's the potential of those technology. We really need to have them trained, educated early on, because eventually they are the people who are going to face all the patients we have. The third one I'll call out is really, I think many panelists mentioned, we will really encourage the partnership between academics, industry players, as well as the tech companies. And those partnerships will make sure we cover every aspect in this. We need science, we need technology, we also need bold ideas. Well, that's all for me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jian. This has been so informative. I really appreciate your sharing several promising examples on the usage of digital technologies and how they are quite doable, and the promising role and importance of digital therapeutics in the future, and also sharing and highlighting, some of the key challenges, including in the design to start with, and the importance of training of medical staff on this. And much like Mike had highlighted, the importance of partnerships, of collaboration. And to those, I would add, as always, as an advocate for older people, to include older people themselves in that conversation. So I have a couple of questions. We may not be able to go through all of them because I would like to use the last few minutes for quick takeaways from all of you, but I see a question from a dear colleague, Erica Dar from AARP. In addition to the diversity challenge in algorithms, there's also a gender bias whereby most of the software designers are male. We need more women and older women's inputs in design. Have any of the panelists and their organizations worked on these issues? So I don't know if any of you have done this work and would like to take the floor, or even if you have not and you think it's important, the floor is yours for whoever would like to address this.
So maybe I give it a go, Amal, and then let my colleagues comment. So I don't have direct experience, but I spoke earlier about, for me, a critical piece of making what a potentially immense beneficial innovation successful is making sure that we engage and involve the people who will be ultimately those using them, which means a diverse group, also from a socioeconomic and gender point of view. So I think it's a very good call out from the question, just to remind us all to really take this at the forefront as we talk and start to implement and innovate on these approaches. But maybe defer now to my fellow panelists.
Yeah, I think, again, from an industry perspective, we partner up with med device companies. It's not just Philips devices that we use in our digital tools when we're engaging with patients. So this is where, again, Mike, as you described in your talk, how are we partnering up, with industry across academics to get this diverse data set? In our data sets around ECG data management, where we're looking at this from a post-software processing, we do have this diverse data set, but how do we translate that into the devices? Because again, this is where it really matters that we're not making that mistake. And this is where I think that's where, again, this partnership across all aspects and facet of healthcare, we need to come together and push from a vendor perspective to bring these topics up. So this is very important from a Philips perspective as we engage with partners in various devices that we're leveraging in our tool set.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike and Jen, for addressing this. And just to echo from Dr. Cynthia Stewin, who also put a question here, and she's the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging at the United Nations in New York. I think she's echoing that message, calling upon you guys, especially those in the private sector and in the academic area, to take steps to overcome this digital divide amongst older persons and really include older women, especially that data show that older women use digital technology less. I think I have time for maybe one or two more questions. I'd like to reach out to Michelle, since she brought up some examples from her experience in Botswana, what in your view could be policy conversations that need to take place to ensure that these digital technologies, and from your experience, robotics, make their way through to older people in low and middle income countries? Just from your personal experience, I'd really appreciate your feedback on that.
Thank you, Amal. I definitely think that there needs to be an opportunity for us to not bias the situation. Many times when I talk about robotics in low and middle income countries, people push back and say, oh, they're too expensive, let's not talk about it. And so I think a part of it is having governments kind of open up the discussion, and instead of assuming that they're too expensive, therefore they can't be absorbed, is to begin to engage the population in the discussion as how do we do this. Our experience in Botswana, we have a cross section of folks who've been using our technology, including older women. And many people are excited to experience it and to participate. And we, after each session, we get opinions. How do you feel? Is this usable? Is this acceptable? How could we change it? And I think this is key, a cross section of input from people who normally don't get asked about these types of technologies. I think is super, super important. And I think also just begin to raise awareness. We in Botswana, it's funny, just a quick anecdote, like one of the young men who tried our system, he decided that he would tell his friends that he was the first person to use a robot in Botswana. So there was this excitement around, hey, this technology is coming to us. And I think it says that it is that there are communities that are really eager for good solutions around dealing with disability, dealing with their lack of access. And so we really need to kind of push governments, Ministry of Health and Wellness, to consider these types of systems more so than just mobile health, but like advanced technologies as well.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Really, really insightful feedback. And just a last question from me to Diane. If you were sitting in a room with a decision maker, a government member, what would be like the top key message you would tell them to convince them to take up a life course approach to vaccination and to focus on adult vaccination?
So I think that the key thing I would say is that immunization and vaccination at all stages of life is highly cost effective. And the investment, really offers significant gains and helps avoid downstream health and social care capacity costs, particularly in the older population, and particularly those with underlying comorbid conditions as well. So those would be the things that I would say, to really consider, and that to really invest in infrastructure that is, handheld, that is digital, and that is easy for older people to use in order they can be aware of their own vaccination status and be empowered to, to be partners in their own healthcare moving forward. So those are the kind of key things that I would say, Amal, would be really worth consideration moving forward.
Thank you so much, Diane. I see one question from the audience as well that I'd like to squeeze in if I can. Our Letty Pinnell says that the issue is not the technology, but how you use it. We've been experimenting with social robotics to train persons with autism to provide recreation to older persons with dementia via robots. How can we expand social robots in low and middle income countries? I think Michelle touched upon that a little bit. I don't know if you want to add to it, Michelle, or if anyone else would like to add to this question, or do you feel that it's been answered already? I leave it up to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really great comment. And in that social robots, I think, especially for dementia and companionship and loneliness, can really be helpful with not just kids, but also with adults. I think, again, it really is about the affordability issue. And that when we try to begin to translate, US dollars, something that costs $1,000 in US, is costing 10,000 pula in Botswana. And so I think really need to get creative about how do we take these social robot systems and make them more affordable? How do we get creative about materials, about using in-country resources to drive the cost down so that these systems can be available? I think that's really a big barrier in terms of robotics. And so really need to, I think that the information is out there, the evidence suggesting that it's a really good thing. Now we got to get creative as to how to manufacture them, how to bring them to the average person. I think that's the challenge for how do we create policy? How do we support that? How do we bring industry, academics, and partners together to really create this and drive the cost down? I think that's really the next barrier.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I mean, these are all really important topics, and it's been such a rich discussion. And I want to share with you all that now that I have the floor as a moderator, that the Secretary General of the UN later this year, his annual report on aging to the General Assembly will focus on older persons and technologies. And a lot of the discussions that were had today will be captured in that report. And as we have only a few minutes left, and because this discussion was so rich, I'm sure the audience would agree with me that we would very much appreciate from our panelists, just based on the presentations that you gave and hearing other colleagues on the panel bring in their own perspectives, if you could share with us one or two main key takeaways that you would like the audience to leave this webinar with. And I'll work my way backward from the list, starting with Dr. Jian.
Thanks, Amal. For me, my takeaway, I'm very encouraged, to hear from all the panelists, right? We have a consensus on the potential and the existing usage of digital technologies for our elder population. I think we need to join hand in hand and work with government agencies such as United Nations to amplify this voice, to really eventually hopefully have some sensible policy changes, etc., to support those technologies and for our elder patients, as well as Michelle rightfully pointed out, for many those low and middle and low income countries, for those people. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Diane, your key takeaway.
Hi, I think prevention is better than cure, and if we can really focus on investing in preventative measures, that can often help avoid further decline in your capacity, in your function, and really help people stay contributors to society for as long as possible and maintaining the kind of healthy lives that they want to lead. My only other takeaway is collaboration. We achieve so much more when we work together and when we work across functions, organizations, and when we really collaborate. And that's a spirit that I would love for us to harness and capture even more as we move forward.
Hear, hear. Thanks, Diane. Mike?
So been a very enlightening discussion for me. It confirms that digital health solutions are really going to play a key part in providing healthy aging and assist people with healthy living and really create an autonomous environment. But the message, I know it, but it was really important to hear it come back through, is we only will make this work if we do it in collaboration with older people and a diverse set of older people and with their caregivers. So for me, it was really that message, putting the people who are going to be the end users at the center of all our technological discussion, if this is really going to be a practical, scalable solution.
Really great to hear that. Thank you, Mike. Jen?
Yeah, no, thanks. I definitely want to echo what Mike is saying in terms of diversity and inclusion and how vendors can help push this topic. But overall, I do, again, that partnership piece that if we are developing tools, these tools need to be covered because our doctors are not going to prescribe these solutions if it's going to cost patients quite a bit of money out of pocket. So again, how do we bring together further collaboration from industry, regulators, research communities to ensure that these digital health tools, which we know are here to stay and have great promise, to ensure that it's accessible, it's equitable, it's reimbursed, and we can make this a global, scalable value proposition to help manage the health of our populations.
Thank you, Jen. A super important criteria to put this all to use to benefit older persons. Michelle.
I want to just drive home again the importance of bringing these high technologies to low and middle income countries. And in order to do so, we really need to think about the issue of affordability and cost, and how do we support the transfer of some of these evidence of the robotic systems into these countries where a lot of the population that needs the care exists. So I would want to kind of drive home the need to partner to come up with really novel solutions to try to bring these high-tech robotic systems into the hands of low and middle income countries.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And to comment on that from Arletty's last comment, is that middle income countries are left behind from the group of low and middle income countries. So that's something for us to keep in mind. Thank you so much to our experts. It's been such a great session. I really appreciate it. To all our audience, please make sure to come back again tomorrow for the continuation of the WSIS ICTs and Older Persons track. The Global Coalition on Aging has organized a panel called Healthy Aging Ecosystem, How Digital Solutions Are Expanding Access to Care. We hope that you will all join for that. Before we officially close the session, I would like to invite the WSIS team to play the WSIS Forum 2022 Partners video. Thank you all.